we're on our favorite spot on the farm, which is the bistro. And
Absolutely.
Neil does all the cooking, which is amazing. But I think I contributed to breakfast today.
You made the ricotta with garlic scape spread.
So I made the ricotta, and I made garlic scape spread. It's summer.
Mm.
Yeah.
Nice and shady and cool here.
Yeah.
So how did you get into food that you're so into garlic scape spreads?
So I've been thinking about this a lot lately because since we've been together, I cook so little anymore. But I love to cook, and I've been always very experimental and interested in food. But you had asked me recently the question if I remembered when I got introduced to good cheese, and I haven't been able to think. I haven't been able to figure it out. So I'm thinking in the scale of cheeses I had growing up. I remember that we would eat the Hickory Farm smoked cheese, and then in my teens, my mother and I got really into pepper jack, and pepper jack quesadillas were a huge snack in our household. They're always the port wine cheese ball.
That was pretty ubiquitous.
Yeah.
I think we had that a lot in our house.
Did you?
Especially at holidays.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, literally the only cheese I remember as a kid is Laughing Cow, of course.
Yeah, and Laughing Cow. I love that.
But also deli Swiss, sliced by the guy behind the deli counter. He'd hand me a piece every Friday when we went grocery shopping.
Ah, excellent. Yeah, I know somewhere in there I got introduced to brie, but I don't really remember it. But I think my epiphany about cheese happened when I was 17. The summer between my junior and senior year of high school, I had the opportunity to go on a grand tour. It was done through the International Youth Hostel Organization, and we were a group of, as I recall, about 14 teenagers with two, pardon the expression, hippie leaders.
Well, that's what they did during that time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and they really were not the best people to be leading a group of teenagers around Europe.
Oh, what fun you had!
Oh, what fun we had! But that's where first stop was France, and it was bring on the cheese. Like every market we passed, I was going in and getting cheese, and the farmers markets. Every country we went to, I was seeking out cheese, and I don't remember why, other than maybe it's sort of
so cultural.
Yeah.
And so part of I went to Italy in high school. We didn't have hippie leaders; it was a priest. But Father Bonadius was Italian, so he knew all the best little spots. It wasn't the tour of the tourists, it was the behind the scenes in Rome, and we're going to go to this little pensione, and they're making us the tortellini and brodo right scratch just for us.
wow.
And so that was pretty cool. That was kind of my first real experience with food, but cheese, I think it has to be Italy, because I don't remember specifically searching out, but I remember a range of cheeses that I had never tried before.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you what they are now,
Yeah.
but they were distinctive and unique because it was part of every meal,
Mm-hmm.
where it was so different. And even I grew up, my dad worked with international people. People from all over the world would come to our parties at the house, but they were all really simple because Mom was a Midwestern farm girl and cooked, casseroles. So it was, going to Europe was really the awakening.
Well, the funny thing about the group that I was traveling with was all they wanted to eat was Italian food in every country we were in.
Oh.
So there was one guy that was on the trip who was willing to go. Like everybody would go to one restaurant, and the two of us would go someplace else and have, like when we were in Austria,
You had a choice was great.
Yeah.
We didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
On
Well,
our tour.
Yeah. But so that was, I think, my first sort of deep dive into exploring food. But otherwise, it was recreational cooking. I dated a guy in college who really loved to cook, and
It wasn't me.
and we got a subscription to Gourmet Magazine, and in the disgusting dorm kitchen, he would produce these gourmet meals, and it was amazing. And it would look like it was straight out of the pages of the magazine.
I was doing the same thing at the same time.
So then I got sick my sophomore year of college, and I had to take a semester off. And we're leading up to the deep dive.
Dun dun dun.
So I'm sitting on the stool in my godmother's kitchen, and my mother and I and Sue were having the conversation about what am I going to do now that I'm not in school. And I was reading the Sunday Times travel section, and there was a piece in there about a place called Tillicum Village, which is located on Blake Island, which is an island in the Puget Sound off Seattle. And what that place was, a tourist destination that celebrated Northwest coastal traditions and had a salmon bake. And I was an anthropology major, and I happened to have just come out of my semester of Native North American cultures, so that was very much on my mind. And I don't know why, but I decided this was...
Because the universe was trying to introduce you to me.
I know.
And it failed. Because what years were those?
So that was in 1988.
88. That was I was in Ireland in 88.
Okay, so we missed the first time.
I didn't move to the San Juan Islands till 91.
But I moved back. I had moved back by then.
Right.
So that was our
second attempt. The universe failed again.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know what got into my head about why it might be the place for me to go. But again, this was 1988.
It's the place to go, man.
There was no internet back then, you know. And they only had a satellite phone on the island. And it was really expensive. And so if you tried calling them, they very rarely would actually answer the phone. But because it was a tourist company, you took a ferry from Seattle to the island. They did have an on-island office. But I wrote them a letter. And I said, hey, I'm this anthropology major with nothing to do. Hire me. I don't know why. But they did. And I went. And my first memory of that was I had one of those enormous 1980s soft suitcases that had the little tiny wheels on it.
Mm-hmm.
And Seattle's like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so I took the train across the country, which was just absolutely an amazing experience. And then I'm staying at this hotel that's up here. I have to get down here, and I lost control of my suitcase. And so it's bouncing down the hill. And then a doorman happened to step out and caught my suitcase for me, so it
at least you didn't deck them.
I know, but also didn't end up in the Puget Sound.
Yeah.
But then my memory gets kind of sketchy about what about what I had agreed to do for work there
on the
island. Yeah, like, I mean, what I did was work with food. I mean, that was what my job was. But I was. So it's not an inhabited island. It has a park ranger station because most of the island is a state park, and then had Tillicum Village, which was a concession on. So people would come over. Boaters could also come independently. There were people camping on the island, but the staff was the owners and Rob, who did all of the choreography and archiving of things.
Troupe?
What?
A dance troupe? Choreography?
Yeah. So.
Please explain.
Yeah.
I think the viewers have lost you long ago. How does this relate to food?
Yeah.
How is this cheese?
So, you arrive on the island on the ferry, and you're greeted with a steaming bowl of clams, and somebody in Tlingit costume, as I recall. So most of the staff were from various communities in the Native Northwest, in the Northwest. So, as I recall, I remember I was working with some people who were Snohomish and Tlingit and Salish and Makah. This is many years ago now. I do have notes somewhere. So there was a core staff that lived on the island, and then people on their days off would go off island. I was one of the people who was living on the island. Let me tell you about the entertainment. It was all self-made.
Here comes the choreography.
Not yet. So we didn't have TV. We had a satellite phone. What we did have was a bumper pool table and cribbage boards.
An interpretive dance.
Not yet. so
They want to see the dance. Dance.
So I had never played cribbage. Let me tell you, I learned how to play cribbage by learning cutthroat cribbage. If you play cribbage, you'll understand. They were the most vicious cribbage players on the planet. But man, after many months of being there, I got really good at cribbage. Would you like some more to drink?
Yes, please.
So that's what we would do on the off hours. Mostly play cribbage. But they would also tell me stories about living on a reservation and going to dance competitions. And in the meantime, Alex was teaching me how to trim a salmon, because after you've arrived and you've had your fabulous dish of clams, the centerpiece of the meal, there was this buffet, but then if you look in the center of the room, there was this enormous fire pit with split alder sticks with split salmon standing. And let me tell you, I since that time have not wanted to eat other than lox. I have wanted to eat salmon any other way, because as it's standing up on the fire, the fat is just
Cooking it long before influencers ever existed.
yeah.
Yeah.
The fat drips through, and I want that. Anyway, so I was learning how to split salmon. So the salmon would come over on a boat, and they would be in these big styrofoam containers, and we had to split the salmon. So that was my first introduction to handling a fish. I mean,
And king salmon weigh a lot.
Yeah.
The wild ones, they were used back then.
Yeah, they were fully this big.
25, 30 pounds easily.
Yeah. So you got charged for bad trimming. So I had to make it. It would weigh, like, when you're basically breaking the bones in the back of the salmon so that it lays flat like this, so you can put it onto the alder stick and stand it up on the fire. So they would weigh that, and you would get your pay docked if you didn't do a good trim. So I learned really quickly how to do a good trim and break on the salmon. So I was not involved in the cooking of that. What I was doing was helping out in the kitchen for the buffet portion of things, like making the clams. And I seem to remember Jell-O, but I really.
There's no cheese or dairy in this story.
No, there's no cheese or dairy. This is just me working professionally in the food industry, sideways. Because most things I do end up being some sort of
Pacific Northwest beach bum is not. different definition of working in the food industry.
Well, but yet.
But yet it worked, and yet that was how it was.
That was how it was. We made these pan pulled potatoes that had water and the butter was in, and that's how I got my first third-degree burn ever. But yeah, that was my introduction to food and working with it.
Obviously, it infected you.
Obviously, what?
It infected you.
Infected. I guess in some way it did.
You're still doing food today, even though you didn't cook this.
Well, so then, fast forward to when I was working at Mystic Seaport,
Bum, bum, bum.
where I worked in multiple exhibits, including the Buckingham Hall House, where I was doing open house cooking demonstrations, and on the LA Dunton, which was a fishing schooner where you would do what was called a mug up. So I was cooking on the stove in the galley and preparing whatever I felt like, which was cool. And so that was really amazing. I love doing open hearth cooking, and we really need to have one here.
What about your time as a professional alewife?
I've never been an alewife. I have been an oyster shucker. It's alewife adjacent. And I've also
There's a joke in there somewhere.
and I've also been a professional baker. And then cheese. With a lot of museum stuff in between. But always being very interested in as a, you know,
Archaeological aspects of food.
actually anthropological.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, because it's all about the people. You know? So I taught myself Indian cooking and Chinese cooking and Moroccan cooking, and I love cooking. I love food. I think those cooking introductions, I think, is what made it make sense to me. Help make it make sense to me to become a cheesemaker. Yeah. How'd you get into food?
Self-preservation.
You were pickled?
I was a hungry boy. I could not get enough food. And so I recall there were 2 slim volumes of Peanuts cookbooks, Charlie Brown and Juanetta red cover and Juanetta green cover, and inside were cartoons of the Peanuts, you know, Snoopy and Charlie Brown and stuff, but they had recipes like jelly bean sandwiches, peanut butter and jelly beans and bread. And it was all stuff that kids could cook. And it was one of the only kids cookbooks I knew about as a kid. It wasn't even ever shown to me. We snuck a look at them. My mom had them or something. And so she would leave, and my brother Charlie and I would cook out of the cookbooks. And I seem to recall one of the books was more advanced, like it wasn't the simple, you know, ants on a log or peanut butter and jelly or stuff like that. It involved using the stove. Now, as a toddler, I had burnt my hand, it doesn't show anymore, really badly on the coil stove, the electric coil stove, because my brother Steve set me up on the counter when the stove was glowing red hot, and I thought that was so cool I wanted to touch it. Burnt the bejesus out of the palm of my hand.
Yeah.
So I was a little nervous about stoves, but some way we started cooking like toast. I think one of it was just like toast, but not from a toaster. It was like over the pan kind of toast. And so that was probably my first cooking experience. And then my dad got promoted where he had to travel quite a bit, and sometimes he'd take my mom, so she would make her ubiquitous casseroles and put cooking instructions on them. And then it was my job to come home from school, because remember, Gen X latchkey kids come home from school, start the oven, pop those frozen casseroles in, follow the instructions, and go. And sometimes we'd have like Hungry Man dinner. Like if they were going out just for the evening and it was a surprise thing, they'd stop by the market, get Hungry Man dinner, and I had to cook that myself. So that was kind of my first cooking. And then in high school, at some point, I got hold of an Indian cookbook. I was fascinated by it. And I tortured my father and my brother because I made the hottest stir-fried eggplant. Indian spices and all this stuff. It was absolutely inedible. I think I fell on the sword and ate the whole rest of the pan, but my brother and my father couldn't even, and that was all there was for dinner. It was like rice and this incendiary eggplant, which was quite fried and crispy. I nailed that on my first attempt, but the spice was way off the charts.
You probably weren't sampling as you were going.
Back then, probably had no idea. I was following, and I thought, "Ooh, I like that. Say, you know, that spice. We'll add more of that." And I think that was one of the classic cases of misreading the teaspoon, tablespoon kind of thing, or ounces or grams. I forget what. And it probably ended up tripling the spice. And then in college, I was on my own, lived in a house with a bunch of other guys, grad students. I was the only undergrad, but I had a little apartment. We had a kitchen, so I had to cook for myself. And I think my first cookbook, I just went and randomly grabbed the compilated volume of Marcella Hazan's Italian Cooking, the two cookbooks in one. And I just started working my way through it. And I knew, I went to University of Connecticut, so it was out in the country. And the local supermarket had rabbit, and rabbit was half the cost of chicken at the time. So I ate a lot of rabbit. So I learned how to cook rabbit, and eventually led me raising rabbits. And you can raise rabbits for half the cost of chicken.
And he wooed me with rabbit.
Rabbit is really yummy.
It really is yummy.
And easy to prepare.
I don't remember when I started collecting cookbooks. Like I know that there were
I think the Barcella one was my first one and only one for years.
Well, because for me, the cookbooks, I mean, I read them like books. You learn so much about culture and region and just like even hearing about different foods, just like an existence of a vegetable that you're not about to encounter in New England. I mean, hello, chayote.
Yeah, right. And I was asked to cook. At one point, about 20 years ago, I was asked to cook a series of dinners that were from around the country, country. And so someone said, well, we have to have a Hawaiian dinner. I think they were thinking luau and poi and all that stuff. But in my research, I found really amazing, and I forget who the chef was, New Age Hawaiian stuff. It was classic Hawaiian dishes and classic Hawaiian flavors with a new, more modern twist on them and restaurant things. I ended up having like 5 or 6 cookbooks, all Hawaiian cooking. I still have some.
It's funny, when I was living in Hawaii, I went to, so if you're ever traveling in Hawaii and have the opportunity to go to a luau, don't go to the commercial ones, go to the church luau's. Those are the good ones. But mostly when I was eating in Hawaii, when I lived in Hawaii, there was a pierogi place. So,
go to Hawaii
and have pierogi all the time. They were so good. Yeah. But then cooking became a big part of your life because of a major life change, and where you were living was our first major intersection of not meeting.
Explain. I don't recall. What do you know? What do you know I don't?
So you moved to the San Juans.
Well, I moved to part of that was I moved to the San Juans after college because I didn't know what I was going to do.
That's San Juans of Washington State.
Yeah, San Juan of Washington State. And I did that because actually, yes, I'd gotten a job in Michigan at a vineyard that fell through at the 11th hour. Literally, I had given up my apartment, sold all my possessions that I wasn't taking, threw away everything, packed the car with all my worldly possessions, was driving down the road, stopped at the first gas station, went to the payphone and called them, the farm that I was going to work for, and said, "Yup, I'm on my way. I should be there a day early before the job starts. Just let me know this and that." And they said, "Who are you again?" And I said, "Neil Foley." And they said, "You told us you weren't coming. We don't have a place for you. We've given away all of the places in the work spots." He says, you said no. I said, "Absolutely, I never said no. I filled out all the paperwork. I mailed you the stuff. I agreed. You gave me all of the welcome information." And I said, "Well, nope, we don't have a place for you."
Wow.
So I had been working for my professor.
Can I just say, I'm thinking about all the traveling that you and I have done in our teens and 20s with payphones and no computers.
Exactly. I mean, there was no email chain. There was no.
Yeah.
It was mail something off and wait for a week to get it returned.
Did you use the AT&T long distance phone and the other one, the...
No, I was a roll of quarters. And just
really?
or nickels or whatever the hell they were back then.
Calling cards.
They didn't. Yeah, I don't remember those existing until after I lived in the San Juans.
No, they were around.
So I immediately, I'd been working with the monastery in Connecticut because my philosophy professor had taught them philosophy, and so we'd done some farm-related projects and things, and so I called him up and asked if I could stay at his palatial house that he rented. And he said, "Yeah, sure, come on," because I would travel across the state and work at this place called Promisec on the weekends, and so I just stay there rather than drive 4 hours round trip. And so I went there, and he said, "Well, what do you think about going out?" And one of my friends had actually gone out to the San Juans before, James Nolte, and he was there already. He goes, "Well, what about going out and joining James on the island at the monastery, the priory there, Our Lady of the Rock, Benedictine nuns?" He says, "Yeah, you can get college credit for doing this, and you can write this paper." And he gave me this sketch of this philosophical paper on soil Thomism, which nobody ever heard of. to write while I was out there. And so I had nowhere to go and no way to do it and no money. And I said, okay. So that's how I ended up working for nuns on the island for 2 years almost.
Should I mention my nuns?
She had nuns, but they were later in life.
Yeah, so when I eventually got to making cheese, I was working at a farm that was owned by Religious of the Sacred Heart. So I was working for nuns.
And my nuns made cheese as well. And that's where I learned about cows and pigs and raising them. And at some point when I decided to stay on the island, because it really was the land of the lotus eaters and Circe's Island and all that, it was blissful. It was, back then, it would rain rain every year on July 4th, and then it would be 70 and clear until the end of September, beginning of October. And then it would start raining and then become winter and gray for the rest of the year. But the summers were amazing, and haying and the farms and the livestock. And there was...
And you were homesteading too.
I was at that point I was married with kids and homesteading, but I would work for exchange for cows and livestock with the nuns, and we had a weekly share of their cheese and butter and cream and milk, and then we got our own cow and started producing our own stuff. So it was amazing time out there.
Yeah.
Couldn't repeat that now.
And just in our weird life story, around the time that he's out there, I also happened to I'd moved back to Seattle. I was working, well, at this very cool place, where I got to speak Japanese and use my skills that were, we'll say, museum adjacent.
and I would go right near where she was working.
But we never met.
Because I would go to Seattle to do deliveries and pick up supplies for the store on the island. And so I would constantly make this route twice a week.
Oh. But then you really went whole hog, as it were, and for food.
Well, so I was working construction back then at a very high-end level. I mean, we were a really exclusive construction company building mansions and high-end stately homes, but not gaudy, pretentious crap, not McMansions, just really well-executed, tight, tidy, second and third homes for people who by now wouldn't even be considered wealthy because of the billionaire and trillionaire class, right? They were just your average semi-millionaires. So because of that, we would quite often have to entertain people who, and also because I was still associating with the monastery, we would have guests of theirs come visit us, and so there was always food going on in our house. I was cooking for more and more people. And then as I started rising in the ranks of the construction company, I was having more dinner parties, and then I broke my back. So for 2 years, I was recuperating and couldn't do real work, so I threw myself into cooking because it was a hobby.
So you threw yourself into cooking as something that you could physically perform, or as something you could do and also earn money out at the time?
Well, at the time, it was more of a creative outlet because I was still we were still having St. Patrick's Day parties and, big groups of people coming to the house and stuff. Because it was also lived on one of the smallest of the San Juan Islands. There was no restaurant. There was no outer thing. So everybody always had dinner parties at their houses. So people were constantly coming around. But then it was the classic trope of, oh, Neil, you cook so well, you should start a restaurant. That kind of thing. And went to my head. And so I started reading voraciously all kinds of Kitchen Confidential and restaurant tales and how to be a cook, how to become a chef is actually the title of one of the books. And Madeline Common's great book on the making of a chef, and LaRouche Gastronomique. I just absorbed it all and was cooking. And then I decided that, there became the opportunity to cook lunch for the senior citizen group that met once a month on the island. And it was about 30 people. And somebody had been doing it, and they had moved or retired and left the island. And so the island-wide senior services were doing, but it was all frozen Cisco stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was really quite gross. And a lot of times, because of the ferries, the people responsible for making the food would heat it up on another island, come bring it, drop it off, and leave to catch the ferry onto the next island.
Oh my gosh.
So it was like a 30-minute turnaround, gone, and there's this aluminum foil trays of lukewarm industrial food sitting there, and the islanders were like, this slop is gross and not hot, and I mean, they had a full kitchen at the thing, and so we calculated it out, and they gave me a budget for the same money they were spending on the garbage. Could I give them healthy, because most of these people had health concerns and dietary restrictions, which were not being addressed by the heavily salted industrial food. And so we came up with a menu and a program, and it was really fun and really easy to knock out. It was lunch, and you know, all these adoring older ladies telling me how delicious it was and great. It went to my head. And so then we started a dinner series on the island once a month, I think. That was heavily popular. And then something came about, like the bylaws of the community center wouldn't let me do it because I was making money. So we came up with sponsors. So someone would sponsor the dinner, and that took the whole thing out. But that we made it so that sponsor would choose an ethnic theme. So that was part of the Hawaiian, that was part German dinner, you know, Oktoberfest and stuff like that. So that kind of pushed my boundaries out, because I knew Marcella and Italian, a certain level of Italian cooking, and because I'd been to Italy and France, I knew a certain French stuff and all of Julia Child's stuff. But then expanding in German and Thai and all the other cultures kind of went there. And at the same time, I decided that I started getting asked to cook private dinner parties. So I had this whole thing about let the restaurant come to you, private catering service, personal chef type thing. And so there were about 10 or 15 families over the next 5 years that I sort of rotated through and cooked on a yearly basis. 3 or more meals for them, for groups, for entertaining. So I sort of became a caterer at that point. But also at the same time, I was turning our own garden produce and our own pork and had milk for whipped cream and stuff. So I was sort of the farm to table thing long before farm to table was mentioned. So that was an aspect of it all.
And so you decided to take what you were doing to a wider audience.
Well, at some point I decided, was that before? I think after I went to Ballymaloe. So I'd broken my back. I had this period where I was undergoing physical therapy and treatments and stuff and seeing chiropractors and not really able to do a ton of work and constantly having to change what I was doing because of how I felt. And so I was doing more and more cooking. Finally got the settlement from Labor and Industries, awarded pathetic number of dollars, seeing that my lucrative construction career was now over for the most part, that I took the settlement and
ran away with it.
I went to Ballymaloe Cookery School in Ireland. I figured that was the thing. At some point, someone had given me one of Darina Allen's cookbooks, and it was about Ballycotton and Shanagary and Cork there, and the pictures were so lush and lovely, and again, it was that farm to table ethos that was really attractive. And so I thought, well, I'll go and take the 3-month course. And when I got over there, I was a little disappointed, I gotta say, because for me, I knew all the basics, and it was really a basics to full-blown course. So I kind of was looking for other opportunities while I was there, because I didn't need to master the basics. But what it did give me was confidence. I improved my knife skills because we had to do the same things every day. There was a rotating group that cooked lunch for everybody every day, and there were set things that we made, and all of a sudden everything we made went for a purpose. If we made jam, we were making it so the store could sell it. If we were making pies, they got sold or used for another event that was scheduled. So it was more of a bigger scale catering than I was used to, and a lot more repetition, which I wasn't getting. So all of a sudden my knife skills and my confidence and my ability to make things work a lot better and smoother started improving. And about somewhere in that time, I think we went over there in beginning of January, around Valentine's Day. The local hotel put a call out and said, we need somebody to stage in the kitchen over the course of the Valentine's Day weekend. It'd be really great if a student would want to come in and help out with basic stuff, just because we know it's going to be slammed. And would anybody want to do that? Now, I'd already done a stage in Ballymaloe House kitchen, so I was pretty confident in big restaurant service, part of that. But what I wasn't prepared for was the kind of fast-paced bed and breakfast hotel service that part of Ireland was known for. What was it called? The Spanish Point restaurant was pretty well known, pretty busy, pretty high end. They had a French chef, Frederick, and
I didn't know Frederick was French.
Yeah,
You never mentioned that.
Huge gorgon of a Frenchman, thick accent, spoke French all the time, but also wicked funny and just so sweet and generous and a lovely, lovely man. And so he immediately saw that I wasn't just some scullery knave, that I had chops, that I could, he asked me, he says, can you cut me this tomato? And I immediately said, well, what do you want? And he said, brunoise. And he walked away. He did not, when he came back, he said, you did that perfectly. What, okay, so now you can do that. You can do these things. And so all of a sudden I got way more responsibility within the first 2 days of the 3-day weekend. And so then he says, service went great, and I was on the veg, so he would do the mains and the starters, I would prepare the veg and then plate and dress the desserts and things. And so we were kind of going around. There was just 2 of us in the kitchen and some wait staff, and it was so addictive and so thrilling. And we went to the pub afterwards, and by the end of the 3rd day of the long weekend, he was like, do you want a job here? Because I really need your help. The summer's going to be busy, it's already getting busier. We really could use someone competent. And so they hired me, and without the right work permits or anything, I ended up working there the rest of the time and got so much experience and so much confidence, but also a lot of drunken restaurant trouble. It was a blast.
That is kind of required in the restaurant
Well,
world.
It didn't hurt that I used to stay when I go over there, because it was we did late night dinner and then a brunch service the next morning on Sundays. So we would work till about 1 or 2 in the morning, make sure the kitchen was clean and stuff was prepped for breakfast, and then we'd sleep in and then get up and immediately launch into brunch. So I would stay over at Frederick's, and he was above the Grapefruit Moon, which was a little bistro, and the landlord was related to Doreen Allen, and so there was this kind of tight-knit community that we were revolving in. And we would drop down to the restaurant in the morning and talk with, I can't remember the owner's name, and have an espresso, and then we would go off and work and then come back. And the Blackbird pub was across the street, so we would come up from the restaurant, go to the pub, and inevitably end up in a sit-in in the pub, a lock-in till 3 in the morning, and then go to so it was a tumultuous time, but full of life and full of learning and lots of really good food and experience. Again, cooking the most freshest. The key about the Spanish Point restaurant was they had their own trawlers.
Oh.
The fish got landed at the pier in front of the restaurant. The best stuff got brought up to the restaurant, and the rest went for sale.
Wow.
And they owned they had their own fish. So it was a seafood restaurant. So I gained an enormous confidence in cooking and handling and preparing seafood that I would not have gotten anywhere else, I think. And so when I came back after that, I was catering and had more weddings and large scale stuff. But then at some point I started the podcast, the Gastrocast, because it was originally based, my friend Lloyd Davis in the UK had done this little first podcast. I mean, we were among the first podcasters. He had done this cooking thing. He came home from one of his famous walks and decided he was going to record himself cooking dinner. And he called himself the Pod Chef. And so I said, wow, that's, I had been thinking about doing a podcast about island life and living on the island. Oh, wow, cooking, that's really cool. Well, maybe, So I did one, and I wrote Lloyd, and I said, "Hey, are you married to the name Pod Chef? Because I want to steal it." And he said, "No,
Really?
go
You
ahead."
stole
Yeah,
Lloyd's name?
yeah, he came
Oh
up
my
with
God.
it, and he
That's
said,
funny.
"No, it's yours," because I explained this. So I went and
Yeah.
became the Pod Chef,
Wow.
and started the Gastrocast that had a large and loyal following for its 5-year period or whatever it was, from about 2005 to 2011.
That's
Somewhere
6
in there.
years.
Well, but I took a hiatus when we moved to Maine, and then just never really got it back and going, because by then it was video, and there was, in the short 5-year period of going from the internet barely able to handling short audio uploads to then coordinating the podcast, because mine was a cooking podcast. It was on food, farming, politics of what we eat, but then I would cook something, and then I would take all the photos of the prep stages. And so at first I was uploading the podcast and then tag coding a Flickr photo series that you would also have to go navigate and you could view while you were listening to it. And then eventually images could then be incorporated into the podcast, but that
He
was
doesn't look like
awkward.
a tech guy, and yet.
But we've got that all figured out, and the RSS feeds and all that tech stuff, long before it was streamlined, and there were only about 150 of us at first of making, and I was one of the first food podcasts cooking, and did that for 5 years, 6 years.
So when did France come into the picture?
France, I went to the International Association of Culinary Professionals, the IACP meeting in Seattle one year, because I was raising pigs and having them butchered, and I was basically just farming them to sell, to make the money for selling, and people would have them cut up to their own cuts and things. And then I kept getting the sense, like every livestock producer does, that the butcher was ripping me off, that I didn't know what the cuts the animal should produce, and that the cuts we were getting back from the butchers were labeled really weird, and I couldn't go to a cookbook and say, sirloin strip in a cookbook, or a certain kind of roast. Nothing matched between what I was getting back and putting in the freezer and what was in the cookbooks. So I hunted down the industry standard breakdown book so I could understand more about the parts, so I could sell my cuts of meat better, and so that kind of started that side of it. And at some point I started streaming British television, and River Cottage came on, and I was watching Hugh Fernley-Whittingstall break down animals and doing his pig in a day, and so break down a pig in a day and do that. And so somebody had given me, one of my British fans had sent the videos over, and so I thought, well, I could teach that. I could see if people wanted to learn that here, and so I kind of started on that. Along the same time,
teaching nose to tail butchery.
Nose to tail butchery, and along the same time, Kate Hill and Judy Vitz came over from Europe to the IACP meeting in Seattle, and we're talking about the French, or the pig. The January is pig month in Europe, so breaking down pigs and using every aspect of it.
And you went to this.
And I went to the conference and was recording it. I think somewhere out there in the universe is my audio recordings of all these speeches. And so I introduced myself to them afterwards and struck up a friendship with Kate Hill. And over the next couple months, we were talking ducks and fat ducks and raising French ducks. And I thought, she was saying she was going to come back in the spring to the States. And I said, well, why don't we do it was back the other way around. I think the conference was in the fall. And I said, well, why don't we do this thing for New Year's on the island? We'll do cassoulet, which is the classic French duck and bean dish. I said, why don't we do that 3 different ways? We'll deconstruct it, and we'll start with ducks and breaking down. Everybody will meet one night, and we'll have a cassoulet that's already prepared, and then I will raise ducks for this. And this was my way of raising and selling ducks and having duck, because who doesn't love duck? And so
he also wooed me with duck.
It's a thing. And so we pulled it off in a few short times. I got ducks, I raised them up to the right size on December 31st, people came flooded from all over the country to the island. I think we had 25, 30 people. And we had this big cassoulet. Kate came over early. We prepared some things in this big cassoulet. And then the next day we went from butchering ducks and defeathering them and breaking them down and curing them and doing all the French cures for duck meat. And then the following day we made the cassoulet from scratch and cooked it, and it was just an amazing French culinary food immersion in the San Juan Islands, and it was so well received, and it was just a blast.
And then we're going to break the story for a moment, and we're going to fast forward 10 years to here.
Yeah. Well, no, in between there,
No,
I'd gone
I know you
back
had,
to Maine, but we'd
then-
done another couple things with Kate with
yeah,
food.
But
yeah.
then we brought her here.
Well, that was also because I went to France at that point in 2011. There was an opportunity to learn from Dominique Chapelard, who had also come
To learn.
to learn charcuterie and breaking down pigs and doing French charcuterie methods. He had come to the States and taught it. I'd gone there and learned it. So we had this, kind of culinary school thing forming, which also we brought here when I moved in with Allison here and we started working at the farm. We had Kate Hill come here to do a duck and pig or
Duck.
duck thing.
Yeah. That was so much fun.
That was a blast. We need to do that again.
Yeah, we really need to do that again. And so my food experience I see very much as foundational for piquing my eventual interest in making cheese when cheese fell into my lap, as it were. Whereas you are very focused, very trained in a lot of different ways. And so food has, for 30 years, right?
Pretty much.
Really been professional. I don't just mean, being interested in it. Actually.
Hopefully I've been eating a lot longer than 30 years. But yes, as a food, let's put it this way. You know how I say I'm a grass farmer?
I do.
And that the cows are one of my chosen methods of harvesting food.
Yes.
Where was I just going?
I don't know.
but because of, so my earliest experiences with agriculture are threefold. I was a little rugrat. I was a little muskrat. I would go and sneak into people's gardens and steal their vegetables and eat them. Not because I needed them, because I just wanted to know what they tasted like. They were cool. They were growing. They were wild. There was cantaloupes and cucumbers and strawberries and in people's gardens, and I would just sneak in and eat this stuff until I got shot at one time. But so there was that part of my childhood and food experience, but then there was the only opportunities to earn pocket money was to go work and harvest berries in our neighborhood, because there were all these berry farms around. So I did that for years as a child, and we weren't allowed to taste in the field. You go, you pick, you focus, you go down the lines, you get as many punnets of berries as you can. You got paid by the quart or the half pint or whatever the measurement was for the day of what the farmer needed. And so there was this kind of intersection of agriculture kind of constantly in the background of food for me. And so the cooking aspect of it just sort of flowed from, I want to grow this stuff. I started a garden in a little plot up on my parents' hill, and I had to carry buckets of water up to water it all summer. And, I grew lettuce and maybe some carrots and some zucchinis or something that were pretty rare for late 70s, in our neighborhood. Nobody had zucchini. That wasn't a thing then. And so, again, it was the growing and then the eating. How do I make this, and what do I do with it? So it's kind of that the cooking is my way of answering the call for agriculture. So it's always been farm to table, even before it existed.
Well, so when I get to cheese, I was working it was an educational farm. So they had formal education programs where there was an entire internship program where youth, college students were coming and learning about what sustainable agriculture looked like as it was performed at this farm, where there were goats, sheep, cows, chickens, enormous vegetable gardens, and the farm was trying to have multiple revenue streams, and so the cheese making there was part of that. But they also they had a summer camp, incredibly popular summer camp, and also were very involved with the local school system, so school groups coming, and because of my background coming from museums where I was designing education programs, this all made sense to me. I have always said that, it sounds so callous to say it this way, but it's true, that the best marketing best education is marketing. You have to make the person want that. Right?
That's how we make people eat grass.
So when I started making the cheese, it was euphoria. It was that I did not go there to become a cheesemaker. I was managing the sales of it and was learning from the existing cheesemaker, who was teaching me his version of how he knew to make the cheese. And so when I took over, it was like cogs that had been slipping suddenly and found their groove, and it was really amazing because I have always been very science forward. I love astronomy. When I was little, I had my little planetarium. I knew all the stars, their constellations and planets, and I had my telescope that I would just burn my eyeballs out looking at the full moon. Anyway, I had chemistry sets. I love science.
But this was more than just science, because now you had cows that you were interacting with.
Right, but I was working with phenolphthalein, baby. I was doing antibiotic tests, so there was this whole...
A much bigger farm than ours.
Yeah, much bigger farm.
With more resources and money.
Yeah. So I had...
Backing of God.
Actually, I think it was sort of the bucking of God. That was what it was successful. They were the most anti-nun nuns that you could imagine. So I got to do this hard science on a daily basis. But there's also the cows on the other side of the wall, and then the cows out in the field, and learning.
Cows are not science. Cows are voodoo.
Cows are chaos.
Chaos. They're chaos theory.
So there I was, stumbling along, kind of making it up. So there were 3 cheeses that we made, and they were set recipes, and I was turning them out fine. But as it happened, this was right at the time, around the time when the very first New York Cheese Guild, which wasn't called that then. It was just getting going, and because this was back in the early 2000s when things were less organized.
American artisanal cheese was just at its birthing stage.
Well,
the revival.
When people were really finally starting to take notice. I always say that it's the golden era of domestic cheese making, because you didn't have to sell it. It was
everybody wanted it because it was new and fabulous. It
was just this. I don't know what was happening in the early 2000s, but
it was big. There was a sheep dairy out in the San Juan Islands that got burned out because of over success.
But it wasn't just about the cheese. It was all of the foods that were happening then.
Well, there was a big farm to table thing. Chez Panisse finally hit home with people all over the country.
Yeah.
That kind of ethos. Now, what was that farm your first experience with cows?
Yeah. I mean, other than when I was a little kid and we would go and get the milk from the dairy. Yeah, I had no cow exposure before then, other than liking them from a distance.
Yeah, it was my showing up even though I went to Yukon where there was a cow on view all the time, ruminating.
I mean, Cornell had dairy, Never went there.
Yeah, I never went to Yukon's dairy either. It's so weird. Because
Yeah.
my first real experience with cows was at a monastery on the island. Other than pulling the bull's ring when I was a child, my brother held me up to see my grandfather's bull. I pet his nose and grabbed his ring and yanked, and next thing I know, I was being rushed across the barnyard and up the stairs into the farmhouse.
Oh,
'Cause
wow.
the bull went berserk.
Yeah. But the timing worked out because the newly formed guild was trying to provide educational opportunities for the existing cheesemakers, and Peter Dixon of Peter Dixon fame.
Who you're about to have a talk with in,
I am indeed.
in Massachusetts.
Yes, Parish Hill Creamery, which actually I don't think it was called that back then. Anyway, he was coming to do a workshop for cheesemakers in New York State, hosted at our farm. So he was my very first introduction to a professional cheesemaker who was not a fly-by-night cheesemaker, and it was again.
Beware of bathtub cheese, fly-by-night cheesemakers.
Or cheesemakers who have no interest in affinage and let hundreds of wheels rot in the aging room, which is what was happening at the farm until I fired him and took over. But so I got to have this incredible introduction through Peter Dixon, and then not too long after that, I think it was just a couple of months, we hosted Kathy Biss from Scotland. I just forgot the name of her creamery. Anyway, she was sort of the polar opposite to Peter. Peter was very, very focused on procedure and technique. Kathy said, "Make sure you write down when you drink your cuppa." It was very much more of a low key approach.
We're going to break this for
Customers.
customers.